Enjoy your close-up, Tommy.
I'm always freaking out.
Oh, it's just the back of my head.
Oh, hey.
It's all.
Oh, is that what I look like? Oh, no.
You can have all the spotlight.
We won't have ourselves up on the screen.
Oh, thank God. I really.
Oh.
Although I will need to share the screen.
My self-centeredness will never recover.
All right, let's go ahead and get rolling. Welcome to English 4495 Senior Seminar. This is your capstone course for your English major. So in theory, everybody is getting ready to graduate and confronting the big question, what the hell do I do with an English major?
I like the good theory part.
There you go. So this is a course that is basically sort of designed to give you some options, to give you some ideas, gain some practical experience in what you might do once you get out of Smith Hall. The way that I teach this class is kind of divided into three parts or three main topics that we look at, and we'll go over those, what that means in a second. But we're going to talk a little bit about literary journalism, which would mean non-academic writing and publishing, literary tourism, and arts management. And again, we'll go over what exactly all that means. You have the syllabus here, and you can look it over. Gobbledygook. I think the main points that you would want to take is we'll have basically every week a short writing assignment, probably about 300 words or so, to give you some practical experience. And then we'll have a oral presentation that you will tape on Teams that will involve either PowerPoint or Google, what do they call it, Google Slides, I guess, whatever presentation platform. And we'll go over more specifically what that means. Then you'll do a podcast because everybody knows how much Kernot likes podcasts. So you'll create a kind of professional podcast. And we'll look at literary podcasting a lot in this class and talk about what's good about it currently and what gaps there are that are available, opportunities for budding entrepreneurs who want to go into that field. And then we'll have we'll end the class with a project called an outreach guide, which is basically an attempt to sort of define opportunities for the public to get involved in literature and things that can be done from a touristic aspect. And that can be also kind of a compilation of some of the things that you do in the class. So just to give you a practical idea of what I'm talking about, some things we'll be doing in the class, you'll be making like a walking or driving tour of significant sites associated with a writer. By next Tuesday, I'd like everybody to come to class having selected one writer that you're going to do the bulk of your work on for the term. And the theory here is that you will get a job, you will be either heading a house museum for that writer, or you're going to be involved in some sort of local arts group that a famous writer comes out of your area. So you're going to take over the tourism or the outreach, the programming essentially, for a particular writer. Now there's a couple ground rules. You want to pick a writer that is associated with some city or site that has either a house or some things that you can, that has a place for you to have host events. The most typical one, Ms. Schuler can tell, Mrs. Schuler can tell you all about her experiences working there. It's like the Fitzgerald Museum in Montgomery, a house museum dedicated to Scott and Zelda. Just basically, you can think of what we're trying to do with this class is imagine if you got a job working for that museum. What could you do to generate interest in the Fitzgeralds within the context of tourism in Montgomery, Alabama? And what kind of events you could hold, what kind of programming that you could do to get the word out and get people to the House Museum and be part of the community. There's a few events that we'll have an opportunity to be a part of over the course of this term. The most important of which is one of your biggest contributions is you're going to help plan the 2026 Hall Waters Prize. We'll go over what that means here in a second. But this is going to give you practical experience in how you put together an event. I will tell you very bluntly that anything I ever accomplished in my career had less to do with anything I ever wrote and published than the fact that when I was your guys' age and started going to literary conferences, I helped make the coffee. And that got me a leg in the door to be an organizer of different groups and a leader in different literary societies, probably too much of a leader at a certain point. But it's a way for you to get practical experiences how to organize events and what you have to do to publicize them, to draw a crowd. Now, some of us already have experience in this, but we still have a lot of practical things that you never think about. If you'd have told me 40 years ago when I was your guys' age that one of the things I would spend my time doing was booking a $36,000 boat ride in New York City Harbor to wrap up a Great Gatsby Centennial Conference, I'd have thought, why would I get a PhD? Why don't I just go into tourism? But it's actually a way for us to get out of the book and into the street. And that's one of the things, you could take that as the model for this class. We're taking literature out of the book and putting it in the street. And that can mean a lot of different things that we'll talk about. A couple other opportunities, speaking of the Fitzgerald Museum, every spring they have a gala, which is a fundraiser. And I always like to invite students in the class to dress up as flappers and sheiks and come up to Montgomery and experience that party. In fact, I'm going to grab something out of my office right now.
It's only you. Nobody concerned for secondary. We did get commercials.
Spare you 30 years of pictures of me in tuxedos. But I'll just show you last year, this was a group of from this class who had a great time dressing up and being part of the event. So, and generally, we figure out a way to get you in there for free. It may require a little volunteering, but that's good experience in and of itself. So, and one of the other things, how many of you are in Dr. Bond's class? A couple of you. So one of the things you may have heard yesterday that is going to happen is we're going to bring Cormac McCarthy's brother to campus in March. So we're going to have Dennis McCarthy come visit our class as well and talk a little bit about how you manage a literary estate. Plus, he's a great writer himself, so we want to talk a little bit about his book as well. He's got one novel published, and I think he's finishing up another. So the way this class works is very typically Tuesdays will be sort of our content days, where generally I will come in with a PowerPoint, kind of talking about a specific site associated with the writer. We'll try to start Monday with Franz Kafka in Prague, just because I went to Prague over Christmas break and sort of did the immersive Kafka experience. It was very Kafka-esque. I feel like that's the obligatory joke we have to say. But talk about sites that are associated with him. What's the value of a writer, a famous writer, to a city? And what does that mean both economically and what does it mean culturally? And part of what we want to do here is we want to understand that, yes, literature is art, but it's also a commodity. And the way we make a living for ourselves in the arts, if that's what we want, is we got to figure out how to get out there and sell it. And so this is a little bit about being maybe a literary influencer. We'll talk at some point about Book Talk and all of these platforms by which people make names for themselves as critics. We'll talk about different types of literary fads or literary styles that people are into. We'll talk a little bit about, gosh, what is it again? What's the Donna Tartt?
Dark academia.
Dark academia, yeah. So we'll talk about dark academia, but also dark tourism, which is tourism that is generally associated with kind of weird, maybe even a little gruesome type stuff you don't normally think of as being touristic in the celebratory ways. Again, the syllabus is pretty self-explanatory. What we'll do here is every week I'll open the next, probably on Sundays, I will open that week's module. And you can go in there and look at the assignments. I generally do not assign stuff outside of class before class. In this case, there are a couple articles in week 1 that I would like you to read. If I have something that I want to assign for the next week, I'll probably bring it in, either bring you a copy or have it in there the Thursday before. So like if we're going to do something next week, I'll have it in there. Now, we're not going to talk necessarily a lot about those two, but I want you to get an understanding of the place of great books in our culture right now, but also why it's important on us as humanities majors to preserve the humanities, especially in the age of AI. I mean, that's a huge, it's a huge threat to what we're doing. All right. I think that's basically the sort of general overview. I'll let you all read the syllabus itself. I do feel obliged to say that in this class, attendance is mandatory. Last year, I had an experience where a young lady who disappeared for at least 2 months and then came back and said, well, I didn't think we had to come to class. So, you know, if I got to come to work, I feel like you guys have to come to class. Now, I know there'll be exceptions, people get sick, things will happen, and that's fine. But I ask that you do let me know ahead of time so we can make plans for that. The other thing is, in terms of, I've been struggling how to address this both with faculty and with students, but let me just say this. The faculty in this department are very aware that there are certain teachers with a reputation for being more of a hard derriere than others. And being chair of the department, I am very aware that I've had to accommodate my standards so students were able to meet the standards of other teachers who may be a little more exacting. What I would like to talk to you about over the course of the semester is I don't think it does you any good if I'm easier on you so you can meet the expectations of other teachers. So one of the things we want to do is try to map out, for example, getting you going on your bigger assignments a little earlier so you're not all stressed out the same week. And so I don't have to hear, well, I've got a 15-page paper due in so-and-so's class. We've got to find a way to manage our workload. And teachers have that too. I mean, we may have 30 papers in one class and 25 in another, and we've got to meet those deadlines as well. So please keep in mind, even though I'm pretty laissez-faire and chill, to the point of maybe not having a heartbeat at my age, but the idea here is that I do have very specific standards, and I'm going to challenge each of you in your writing to both grow and to think about things and find different angles to approach it. The type of writing that we're going to do is probably not the type of writing that you've done in college. It's going to veer into two veins. One is going to feel, honestly, it may feel a little like AI slop, but one of the best things that you can do is come out onto the market with an ability to write in any kind of genre or to fulfill any task. And that, quite honestly, might mean that you have to churn out more publicity-oriented promotional type materials. You might have to write a flyer, not a flyer, but a pamphlet at some point in your life. That's a whole different audience than writing something that is interpretive or academic. The flip side of that is we're going to write maybe stuff that's not scholarly or interpretive in the way that you've been trained to do in other classes, but probably more journalistic. And that means looking at narrative, how we tell the story of certain authors in certain places. One of the assignments you'll do, for example, is you're going to pick the most controversial moment in your author's life, and you're going to tell that story. And we're going to figure out a way to tell it in which it's both entertaining, has a compelling narrative, as if you were writing a nonfiction book or a biography. One of the things I would like you to be able to come out of this class being able to do is to write a biography and figure out a way to make it narratively compelling. It's a tough thing to do. I read a lot of biographies, music biographies, because as many of you know, my other area that I teach in is music. And I can't tell you how many biographies I read and says, this year they went on tour and played 36 dates and blah, blah, blah. The next year they played 24. And it's like, get to the drugs already. You know, get to the good stuff. So we got to find a way of using our skills as writers to make stuff engaging and dramatic without going too far and being melodramatic. All right, so any questions about any of that? Again, roughly 10 assignments. Now, 10 weekly writing assignments. Now, some of those will inevitably end up being about the hall waters, because you'll have specific sorts of tasks as a class that we'll divide up into that we'll be responsible for. Why don't we shift gears a little bit and we'll go to the infamous PowerPoint here and talk about all of our terms and what we're doing, and then we'll get into everything about the, I'm going to turn off the lights so we can see the screen a little bit better, get into the hall waters for this year. All right, so the big term I want you to think about that links all of these areas is literary outreach. Why is literary outreach necessary? What does outreach mean? Let me ask that. Anybody?
Reach the general public with your specific thing that you're marketing.
Okay. Reach the general public. That's an excellent definition there. You want to reach the general public with the specific thing that you're marketing. Why is that important?
Spreads your message.
Okay. Spread your message. It's a bit of cultural preservation, basically. What we're trying to do is we're trying to preserve the value of literature or the arts in a culture in which it can seem increasingly irrelevant. One of the things I'd like you to think about, 80 years ago, if there was a presumption after World War II that an educated citizen of the United States had a certain cultural literacy. And that was both in history, events history, but it was also in the history of arts. So, for example, GIs who came back to school and women who went to college, they were getting trained in Faulkner or Hemingway, writers who were not necessarily easy reads, writers who were considered literary with a capital L. There was a certain presumption of cultural literacy that people could have all the way up until basically the early to mid-70s. What happened about that time is we had this explosion of scholarly interest in popular culture. And all of a sudden, everybody went from studying Faulkner to wanting to study Star Trek or Star Wars. And that's been a huge controversy. There's nothing wrong with that. There are more books written about the Beatles than there are probably about William Faulkner. More general people probably know more about the Beatles than Faulkner. So, but what does it mean if we are Faulknerians and we are in Oxford, Mississippi, and there's a house there that we're trying to preserve and do things and promote, if not the reading of Faulkner, which is not easy to do and never has been, but just the general awareness of his cultural footprint. One of the worst things that ever happened to Faulkner long after he died, so it really didn't affect him personally, but there was supposed to be a TV show, kind of a Netflix-oriented show, that would take the Faulkner universe and make a whole series out of it, kind of like, I don't know, Southern Game of Thrones or something like that. I mean, just off the top of my head, but no dragons. But the whole idea was they were going to take all of these characters out of the Faulkner universe and come up with a scripted TV series, borrowing some of those general plots and just interfolding them in ways. Unfortunately, the guy the producer that was supposed to do that, who was famous for doing a show called Deadwood, which was a popular Western 20 years ago, got dementia, and I think they lost the rights. So that's one way. Adaptation is a perfectly good example of cultural preservation as well. There's a version, and this is the umpteenth movie version of this novel, but we will probably do one Tuesday on the Bronte sisters and do that specific part of the Moors in England. Anybody Bronte fans? Okay. So we want to ask, why do people keep making versions of Wuthering Heights over and over again? What's the appeal of that narrative in a book that is itself very difficult to read? Well, it probably, at least for this version, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because we've got, what's his name, Jacob B. Lordy or whatever, and who's the woman that played Barbie? Margot Robbie. So, they're basically going to be sexing up Wuthering Heights, which is, okay, because that's basically what wuthering means, But the idea is, can we sell this as a way of, promoting that literary legacy? About 6 years ago, when the last version of Little Women came out, the House Museum in Massachusetts, in Concord, the Orchard House, exploded in interest in tourism thanks to that movie. So there's all kinds of opportunities there to play off of the cultural events in this. All right, so let's talk a little bit about each of these terms and see what generally we mean by each of them. I'm going to give you just some ideas, and these are just broad things that you don't have to write down, but I want to talk a little bit about the more practical side of what we'll do in this class. Usually every Thursday I will try to bring in, via the magic of Zoom or Teams or whatever, somebody who is a professional in the arts. So you can get some direct practical advice of how you get into the field and what is required. So when we look at these things, if we're talking literary journalism, we might be talking publishing or editing, right? When we talk tourism, we're talking about specifically managing an author house or museum, working with a state tourism agency. One of my biggest frustrations with the state of Alabama is between 2006 and 2019, we had an entity called the Alabama Book Festival. Almost every state in the country has a book festival where one day out of the year they bring writers and authors together as a way of promoting literacy. And in some states like Mississippi and Louisiana, that event is specifically assigned to a state tourism agency. In Alabama, we could never get them to take that on, and so we had sort of a patchwork group of people, including Troy University. And by 2017, 2018, it was basically me running this book festival, trying to do this job on top of it. And COVID killed it, because after COVID, there was nobody and no single entity that was willing to take it on and create a position for one person to direct this book festival. So in other states, they might have somebody whose job specifically is to run a book festival once a year, and also to do other programming. So you might think of those types of things. Developing cultural programming, usually at author houses, there's maybe one paid professional who's an expert in how to organize speaker events or how to bring in theatrical dramatizations, how to run book clubs. May seem pretty obvious how to run a book club, but you gotta get people there, you gotta get them to read the book theoretically, and you also have to learn to create enough interest that it keeps going. And that's one of the biggest struggles you'll ever have, is to keep an entity going. Now, some of these things, we get into very particular stuff, like writing grant applications. Okay, that's a great job if you want to be a grant writer. That's a very particular sort of skills to know the language to do that. I don't think AI is going to be able to replace grant applications. So we'll probably bring in somebody who's got some expertise in that. Developing a strategic plan. If you'd have told me when I was an undergraduate that the word strategic plan would ever come out of my mouth, I would have said I'm way too cool for that. But the reality is if you're going to run an organization, it's very important for you to have a vision and to have a 3 to 5 year plan. Otherwise, you have no goals and you get eaten up just in the day-to-day, keeping the doors open type of tasks. So a lot of that kind of stuff falls under what we have now called arts management. We actually have a master's degree in arts management at Troy University now. Our dean got that on the books. I'm a little worried about it because I don't know that he's really assigned any one particular faculty member to be over it. And that's something that I'm pushing him to do. But one of the most fulfilling ways to take your interest in the arts and not end up with a career in data processing or some sort of management for an organization is to find an entity. It might be state, might be federal, might be nonprofit, where you can help run one of these organizations. It might be a symphony, it might be a ballet, some kind of artistic company. But again, that comes with very particular sets of skills. And we'll talk about some of the ways that people in those positions have maybe messed things up a little bit, creating some controversies by not knowing the etiquette of how to run a business. So you can see some of the other tasks on there. Even something as really niche as creating or promoting a literary trail. What is a literary trail? Literary trail is, again, kind of a walking or traveling guide. We have something in the South that I think has kind of died off a little bit in the last few years because nobody is running it, called the Southern Literary Trail. That was put together by a lawyer up in Tuscaloosa. And the whole idea was to link all these author houses basically from South Carolina on into Mississippi and Texas. Arts advocacy is another very important goal, where we're talking about lobbying and another F word that I never thought I would use, fundraising. Every group I've ever been in, we've had to sit down and figure out ways of pitching to our membership the value of contributing money to create scholarships or create some sort of package, financial package, in order to keep the entity going. So these are all the types of things. Again, a lot of this is all designed to get our noses out of books and to get them into the quote-unquote real world, where we are trying to preserve and to advocate for the arts that we supposedly love. Anybody want to make any comments about any of those? If you're thinking of careers, which of those might appeal to you? Which seem a little scary?
Literary journalism is something that I've thought a lot about.
Okay. When we think of literary journalism, I'm thinking really less of you being the journalist, maybe, than you being the editor or the
Narrator.
the entity that helps getting it out there. One career I think we really don't pay enough attention to is something like the writing of educational materials. creating the tools and techniques by which teachers are able to, that we give teachers something to teach through that. And one area that's kind of interesting is when we talk about developing instructional materials is this field of infographics, where using numbers as a way of sort of conveying the importance of stuff. I could see very easily talking about writing or producing documentaries, those types of things. One of the projects that we've done in the past in this class, some of you are probably familiar with TED Talks, those little inspirational, usually a lot of BS, but people seem to like them. But that company also produced some literary TED Talks, which are very interesting because they're just basically short animation pieces on why we should read Franz Kafka or why we should read The Great Gatsby. And that's a great way for advocating. Come back to literary podcasts. Podcasting is a fascinating field. It's a very democratic field. It's easy to break into. It's tough to get an audience because it's become very celebrity driven. But it's also a great way to exercise some creativity. However, one of the tough things about podcasting is I wouldn't say 90, let's say 75% of podcasts are two people in front of a microphone yakking. That's the cheapest way to produce a podcast. Now, that might work. Sometimes the hosts have the, charisma to pull it off, but we can't all be Joe Rogan, right? Or Amy Poehler. I myself much prefer scripted podcasts. Those are much more expensive, and they've become fewer and far between, precisely because the money is just not there right now to fund a lot of these things. However, there are some great examples of literary podcasts that are investigative pieces that we will look at. One of the things we'll do is you'll look at a podcast on Laura Ingalls Wilder, which kind of seems a little maybe old-fashioned, a little like something your grandma might be into, but the reality is there's a huge subculture, Little House on the Prairie subculture. There's a lot of fascinating history around it, but it's also marketed as a kind of lifestyle thing, and there's a lot of connections to it. So. That come out. So this podcast is actually a very interesting sort of deep dive into that world. Another example, I don't know that I'll have you listen to any of this because the content is can be a little traumatic for people, but I'm sure everybody knows the novel Lolita. It's been in the news a lot thanks to Jeffrey Epstein. But, and Jeffrey Epstein, just say this, Lolita is a great piece of literature. And pervs like Jeffrey Epstein completely miss the point. So one of the things we want to do is, if we're Nabokov fans, is how do we save the novel Lolita from that sort of interpretation? Well, the reality is there's a great podcast by a stand-up comedian named Jamie, begins with a K, I can't quite remember the last name. It's about 5 years old, but she goes through the history of Lolita and talks about how different adaptations have misinterpreted it. Lolita originally was not some sort of, there's actually a technical term that I just heard on the radio that basically means not the sexualization of children, but of adolescent girls, as if that's somehow better or more acceptable. But the idea there is that's not really what the novel is about. Nabokov took that subject as a way to kind of be provocative. You could never do it today because people are too sensitive about that subject. But what ended up happening through different movie versions is that the Lolita figure became this image of adolescent sexuality that got hubba-hubbaed over and over again, to the point where, in some of the funniest episodes of this podcast, go in the history of an attempt to make a Broadway musical out of Lolita. And the lyrics are just absolutely baffling. You just wonder who on earth ever thought this would be good. And I may play you the clip of the song just because it's so ridiculous, you can't imagine it. But there are all kinds of adaptations out there that get done. So one of the things I'd like you to be thinking about is controversies surrounding your particular author, because that's a great way to create a podcast. One of the podcast episodes that I've assigned in the past concerns Harriet Beecher Stowe, probably the most boring writer ever, American writer ever born, but most famous for Uncle Tom's Cabin. But she also created a controversy 10 or 12 years after Uncle Tom's Cabin, because she wrote an article in which she basically revealed the fact that Lord Byron, the romantic poet, probably, Dr. Robertson's alter ego, the Byronic figure, that he had a relationship with his own sister. Now that's kind of literary lore, but you can imagine how in the 1870s, an article that even intimated that could be shocking. And people canceled their subscription to the Atlantic Monthly over that, to the point where the magazine all went under. That's a great story, and this particular podcast episode delves into it in a way that makes it, makes you want to go read more about it. So that's kind of what we end up wanting to do when we talk about the literary journalism. Other potential careers or ideas on there. I will tell you that one of the things the reason that we're going to do a Teams presentation is because public speaking is a huge talent for you to have to go onto the market with. I'm going to guess every time I've taught this class, I always get people that feel a little too shy or inhibited to want to be public speakers. But I will tell you, personally, it's a great side gig. I got paid last April. I got offered $2,000 to go to Princeton for 2 days to be on a panel of 2 other people and talk about The Great Gatsby. Unfortunately, my car air conditioner went out and it cost exactly $2,000. Of course, easy come, easy go. But I got a free trip to Princeton. And when you build up a certain expertise, or you get publicly identified with certain writers, that becomes a way to get the word out, and it becomes a way of having a fun life that quite honestly other people don't get to do. I've gotten to go to Idaho to speak on Hemingway. I got invited up to Alexandria, Virginia in April to do something on The Great Gatsby. But there's also a need there to understand how you win over a room, how you can be entertaining at the same time that you can be educational. As a public speaker, you can't stand up and read a paper or read off a script. And now that might work at an academic conference, but it doesn't work with the general public. And you will see people, literally, no matter what you do, there's always going to be somebody in the audience that does this, right? But you don't want to put the whole room to sleep. And one of the reasons that I'm going to push you to do creative, inventive things with PowerPoint or Google Slides is because that visual element is what keeps people interested. I always say to people, you're going to be much more interested in looking at slides than looking at me. So that's a good skill to have as well, and it comes with the confidence of knowing that you can go in and you can command an audience. You can be funny, you can be entertaining, but you can give a lot of good content. The presentation that you're going to do is going to be extemporaneous in the sense that you're not going to be reading a script. You may have some notes there, but you're going to have to speak off the cuff and to have enough of a command of the subject matter to be able to kind of go through your presentation without having to consult notes or anything like that, because that's part of the presence of being a good speaker. Any others on there that you're interested in that you would like to see emphasized this spring as we go through it?
I was looking into, I thought it would be fun to, interesting to work for a literary magazine, but
Okay.
I don't really know
Well,
how I would get people.
Okay, well, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of our guests that we will bring in is a guy who runs a mystery magazine called The Strand. And he created that, he's created that, made a career for himself. He can tell you all about, he's managed to keep it going for almost 30 years at this point. So it can be done. Now it's a little bit of a challenge because of the internet and everything going away from paper and being online, but that doesn't mean you can't create interactive types of magazines. And that's just a friend of mine that I know of. So there are other people out there that do those kinds of things. I will say that a lot of the things that we're dealing with are entrepreneurial. And there's a little bit of a sense that entrepreneurial is a dirty word because we think of it as business. We think of Elon Musk as entrepreneurial, and none of us want to be Elon Musk. I mean, wouldn't mind his money, wouldn't mind his ketamine, but I don't really want to be a jackass like him. But again, a lot of that entrepreneurial stuff is really, if you think about it as public service, of getting out there and really trying to preserve in culture and advertise the things that you love most. All right? So those are the kinds of careers that we'll be talking about that are arts related and get you thinking about the types of skills that individually you have and the ones that you need to cultivate in order to make a name for yourself and really get out there. All right. So the other kinds of questions or issues that we want to talk about is how do we celebrate our literary heritage? How do we make literature fun? How many of you sit there and think literature sounds very serious, somber, and then you think of fun as more Disneyland or some sort of escapism? So how do we make our literary heritage fun? How do we make it immersive? Why is there this huge cult, and it's culminating this year because it's our 250th birthday? Why do people dress up and go to Jane Austen parties? There's a huge market for that. People love to dress up in restoration outfits and go to England, and I don't even know what type of dances those are. It's not square dancing, but it looks like square dancing to me. Jane Austen, in terms of the costuming and that kind of immersive world, is way more popular even than The Great Gatsby. It's probably number 2. How do we sell it to non-academic audiences? How many of you have people in your family that don't understand your interest in literature? How many of them think you ought to be out there selling like aspirin or hamburgers or something, right? So one of the things we have to do is, again, to generate interest. And sometimes, I will say this, the worst thing that ever happened to literature was the idea that it's all about symbols and metaphors and motifs. I mean, those things are great. That's how we find the themes. But the notion that it is kind of literary ideas that are frozen like a painting has really killed off general interest in a lot of literature. So quite frankly, you will often hear me say we have to sex things up. And I don't mean that literally.
Adapt it to the times.
What's that?
Like adapt it to the times.
Yeah, adapt it to the times. Find ways to make it interesting. Generate interest. And a lot of times that involves a little bit of sensationalism. That's a way we get people interested. How do we make culture fun and entertaining, right? How do we make these sorts of issues engaging? How do we problematize the issues and bring them into the real world? At the same time that we want to be entertaining, engaging, we also want to emphasize the fact that there's intellectual issues, that there's a lot of thorny political, cultural issues that are involved, that literature becomes a way of talking these aspects through. One of the things that I've become very interested in, and this is what got me the gig to go up to Washington, D.C. and be part of that book festival, is I'm very interested in the way that American presidents have been compared to The Great Gatsby. And unfortunately, let me tell you, the busiest day of my life, November 1st, 2025, it's a Saturday, I get up, I'm thinking I'm going to paint a room here in my house, go for a bike ride, I'd start checking my text messages. Would you comment on this, please? And apparently the night before, Donald Trump threw a Great Gatsby party,
Oh, yeah.
right? On the same night that they were getting rid of SNAP benefits. So, and I thought, damn, could they not like do the Great Giraffe or something? So really, I'm about trumped out at this point. But, you know, it's a way that all of a sudden this novel that everybody hates reading in high school is relevant to the times we live in. So how do we make those issues relevant in an intellectual way that doesn't alienate an audience, but something that we can have fun talking about? How do we stand up for literature's need to be difficult or different or even controversial? We are going to talk about banning books because some of you may be in a position at some point where you work with a library and you have to deal with the Karens of the world that come in and complain about the fact that a great novel like Perks of Being a Wallflower. Oh my God, it's got LGBTQ content, and you're trying to convert little Johnny, right? So how do we defend literature and how do we defend content in an age where, let's be honest, a lot of young people today aren't reading, period. So we will bring in folks that have dealt with book banning and talk about how we deal with that as a practical way of advocating for literacy. So literacy is probably another term that we want to keep in mind. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Hall Waters Prize. This is the first year in a long time where I've actually nailed down the recipient of the Hall Waters Prize before Christmas. So I kind of felt like, wow, I'm finally organized after 30 plus years. This year we're going to give it to a husband and wife team, actually. So this will be something very interesting for y'all to be a part of. And we're going to give it to a couple out of Ole Miss, out of Oxford, Mississippi, named Tom Franklin and Beth Ann Finley. They're both very phenomenally celebrated writers, very different writers. So we typically, for those of you who don't know, we're going to start working on this Tuesday, actually. We're going to have one of our folks from development come in and talk about the history of the prize and why we do it. But very typically, we usually bring in a writer and we have a event that's open to the public, and then we do a luncheon where we award the prize, and then we do like a Trojan talk thing with them as well. And usually it's a $5,000 prize. This year we're going to give them each $5,000 because we've got the money and we just felt like let's do something different this year. So if you don't know who Tom and Beth Ann are, part of what you will be doing over the semester is doing some research into them. The date for this is going to be April 17th, so go ahead and please mark this down on your calendars. That is a Friday, and it's usually an all-day event, so please let me know whose classes you are in that day. If you've got work things on Friday, usually please try to get off that day already so you can be a part of it. But you will be in charge of this event. You guys will be the interviewers. You'll be creating the promotion. We'll spend a lot of time in class coming up with ideas about how we get people there. I will be very honest, and I take the blame for this, is last year I felt like the public attendance was down for our recipient. That was partly because I was distracted and did not emphasize enough the need to get students and the general public there. One year we did it in 2022 where we filled up the ballrooms over there in the Trojan Center. So that's what I would like to see happen again. These guys are probably best known for, Tom came out of the gate with a collection of short stories called Poachers. He's a leader in what we call Grit Lit, which is like the Cormac McCarthy, very dark Southern Gothic stuff, very, very manly. Lots of murder, lots of blood, lots of viscera. And she's generally written more about women's concerns. She's a very celebrated poet and essayist, But she's also got a book coming out in February, which is, she's kind of done this thing where she's invented a genre that she calls micro memoirs, which is just basically little autobiographical vignettes. So, and then about 10 or 12 years ago, they actually collaborated on a novel together called The Tilted World. So I'll be getting copies for us as a class of The Tilted World. Some of you will volunteer to research into the other books. You'll be generating the questions that we, as a panel, about 5 of you will ask them for the public event. One of you will be the MC for the luncheon, where the chancellor is usually there. It's usually a very fun event. We'll divide it all up, so everybody gets a very prominent public role to do it. But I think this will be a neat thing because we've never done a couple before, and we can get into some fun stuff about, you know, how do they balance writing and career and family. Tom is be very interested because he, for the first time in a long time, probably 10 years, he has a novel coming out. It took him a long time to finish. Also took him a long time to get a publisher because as celebrated as he is, I mean, he's probably the most famous Southern writer of my generation. You know, things have changed since the last time he had a novel out, and he had a struggle in order to get this particular book placed. So everybody goes through these types of career challenges, and hopefully he'll be open and willing to talk about it. So that's usually the sort of the most practical, fun thing we do. All right, just a couple things I want you to think about. As pragmatic as I like to be about all of this being a business and everything, we do have an oppositional role. The arts have an oppositional role in culture. Personally, if I didn't worry about getting in trouble, I would teach literature as a tool of protest, because I think it's a great opportunity to go into the streets right now in the environment that we live in, and regardless of what your politics are, stand up for the fact that we don't want to live in a police state. That said, I don't want Tommy Tuberville coming after me, so we'll probably step back off that a little bit. But we think of ourselves as humanists. We're not going to ever win the war against science. If I go over across the street and talk to the BPAA and say, why are you putting more money into engineering than you are into English, the answer is going to be irrefutable, right? We need that science, right? So we don't want to fight a war against science. We want to defend our role, however, in the knowledge business. We don't want to sit here and tell ourselves that we are, you know, just sort of decoration, cultural decoration. We are knowledge, right? We're not aloof in the name of higher culture. We're not going to be snobs. We're not going to be elitists, right? We want to connect with disciplines outside of the humanities to get us all out of our own silos, out of our own divisions. One of the most prominent fields of literary studies right now, and we've never been able to make this class on this campus, is medical writing. You know, humanities and medicine, because a lot of medicine is about how do we diagnose, how do we describe the experience of grief and loss and suffering. And in a lot of other schools, their curriculum for health and human services includes courses in narrativizing or writing about these subjects from a literary perspective. One of the opportunities that I hope we have in the next couple of years at Troy is to introduce more writing into business and take literature into business. The business school is planning a course, and I said this in the faculty meeting the other day, and everybody burst out laughing like, oh, what silly people. Business storytelling. This is how we tell the story of businesses. And that doesn't mean how we tell the story of you know, the rise of great geniuses or innovators. It means telling the true story of how businesses are developed and producing we might call case studies of figures in business. Publishing is a business, right? So that's one thing we want to think about. So we want to come to this class with the idea that art and literature have cognitive value. Literature is a form of knowledge. The question we face is, what can we do about it? The worst word I feel like was ever introduced into the college curriculum was the word appreciation. Usually in area 2 of your studies, you can take art appreciation, you can take music appreciation, and in some schools, you can take literature appreciation. One of the first things I did when I came to Troy in the 90s was beg them to axe the word appreciation out of anything to do with literature. Because what that means to me, and it's a stereotype, is that we all sit around looking at the sky going, oh, the sky is blue. What shade of blue can we call the sky? Right? If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? You know, this kind of touchy-feely type of stuff. And that makes art feel a little, a little airy, a little not concrete enough. Again, not in the street in the way that we want it to be. So we want to think of literature as the way we've made sense of experience. We want it to tell us something about the world. Now, all of this sounds very general, but when we start looking at specific authors and their literary reputations and how they've been preserved and why they are celebrated in spaces and why there's the assumption that if we throw a Jack Kerouac festival somewhere, that there's an audience that will want to come and be a part of it, that has real cultural value, both intellectual but also economic. All right? Okay, one final thing. One final slide. All right, these are just a couple of quotes that are very important to me about what we mean by literature, and they're kind of two opposing things. When we read literature, there's the argument out there about why is literature important, and you will see studies galore quoted and cited that the reading of literature, the reading of fiction, creates empathy in us. Now, I will stand here and tell you that the reason that I think Candace Owens is full of bullshit and is pandering, I almost got a t-shirt over the break that says Candace Williams is the opiate of the people. Came to me in a dream. That's what I almost got it tattooed. Almost got it tattooed on my chest. Except I never take my shirt off even when I'm alone. So, but the idea is that, and this came about for a very specific reason. I have a cousin who was trying to convince a bunch of us over the holiday break that I'm not making fun of the guy's death, but Charlie Kirk. The whole idea that there's tunnels involved and that there's black ops and there's planes from Egypt. And on a very visceral level, I just want to say, dude, this sounds like some bad Netflix movie. But there's a desire to believe these narrative things. There's a desire to fictionalize that story through all of these what are patently bogus conspiracy theories, because that's entertaining for people. It takes them away from the mundacity of the daily life. So the question, and I do not apologize for saying this, one of the best things that we have as literary people is the fact that we can put ourselves in the shoes of other people, put ourselves in the shoes of people who had never for a moment imagined themselves in our position. And I'll tell you this personally, this is something that I get very defensive about. In Montgomery, and Caitlin knows this, vast majority of my friends do not have college degrees. All right? So I find myself in a constant position where people very condescendingly say, oh, professor, oh, doctor, right? And it's like I'm some little guy in a toothpaste factory, completely irrelevant to the real world because their job is to deliver hamburgers to a table or whatever. Now, we all make choices in life. And as I had this experience the other day where I was with Susie Paul, and some guy came walking up and says, oh, I don't think I'm smart enough to sit at this table, right? Well, you haven't spontaneously combusted, have you? Right? This is the kind of stuff that we who intellectualize issues face every day. there is a sort of reverse condescension. And the assumption is that if you got a college degree, your mommy and daddy had the money to put you in here, right? I have told any number of people, and I apologize if this gets too personal, but when I get defensive in Montgomery with people who act like a college degree is, something that was given to me, I tell them, I didn't have the luxury of dropping out of college. I didn't have the luxury of doing drugs all throughout my 20s or drinking. I had a child at the age of 20, and it instilled in me a fear of failure, a fear that I wasn't going to be able to support a kid, a fear that I would be that parent that disappeared out of a child's life. Everything in my life that has been success has been driven by the fear of failure. And 2 years away from retirement, I look back and I'm sort of grateful about that, because it would be very easy for each of us to slip into that sort of slipstream of cultural, nothing matters and what if it did. So I'm hoping that as we imagine ourselves as art advocates, that in encouraging you to be entrepreneurs is to get you not to apologize for the fact that you are book people, right? The next person that says, well, you have book sense, but you don't have common sense, punch him in the face. There's some common sense for you, isn't it? Right? The reality is that most educated people don't fall for propaganda or fall for the kind of cultural messages that inculcate in us certain, what I would consider anti-humanist ideas, because we've learned the art of critical thinking and we apply it to everything in our lives, right? And that's the fun of having a brain, is to exercise that and to put it out there in the world. So keep in mind, you have empathy because you are a reader. Now, we want to extend that empathy to people who would never give it to us. But I will tell you, one of my biggest frustrations in literary writing on the male side is the glamorization of the working class. I come from a working class family, I have nothing against it, but I also want to call BS on the idea that, who's the guy that did Dirty Jobs, you know that show?
Oh, Mike Rowe.
Yeah. So that's a guy with a master's degree whose whole business is pushing this idea that you should go be an electrician or a plumber because you can make more money. Reality is, you want to be an electrician, it's going to cost you as much as a college degree. It is. That's the dirty little lie that Dirty Jobs doesn't tell you. So this whole idea that somehow we should apologize for being intellectuals or we should apologize for being artists, no, that's our freak flag, and we want to fly it. And we want to go into every situation in the world, not being jerks, but just being confident and taking a stand and saying the things that I care about. I really don't care if you don't care about the Great Gatsby, but you know what? I can see American history unfold through the Great Gatsby. That gives me a prism to understand the world. And it's given me a life. Okay? All right, the flip side of that. The idea that we should exist apart from the mainstream or out of it. That's a very romantic artist notion. And I lived it all the way up until I got a job at Troy University. I wanted to be that bohemian. I wanted to be the punk rock guy. And then I had to get a job. And all of a sudden, I'm 27 years old, I'll walk into a college where the next oldest person is 20 years older, and I'm facing a room that I have to teach of military people. Me who spent the 80s, down with Reagan, down with war. You can't walk into a room and do that, military people. You gotta learn how to win the room and keep the room. That's maybe the other thing that we're gonna talk about, is how do we keep a room of people unlike ourselves. So this whole idea that literature is about complicating life, is about, and the Russians have a term for it, defamiliarization. literature defamiliarizes everyday experience in order to make it new or to reimagine it in a way that intellectually engages us. That's great in theory, and it's great in practice when you are an artist. But you as an entrepreneur of the arts have to familiarize it or encourage people to believe that they can familiarize it themselves, okay? So our job is to think of, and I'll use this phrase very deliberately, our literature, our goal is to, how do we get people to look at literature as stranger things, right? And that it's okay to have an element of strangeness in your life, right? Not all mysteries of life should be wrapped up in a nice little moral. I mean, I love my mother, but every time I tell her a story, it's kind of like talking to the church lady. Oh, isn't that nice? Well, that's a good lesson. Caitlin can tell you this. I made Caitlin split her room with my mom for a week in New York City. And Caitlin came out of there knowing every good old proverb and every easy answer there was to life. So, all right. So this is the whole idea. We're not going out in the world to be radicals or to be bohemians ourselves. But we do want to take that rebellious idea that we have the opportunity to reach an audience that we normally wouldn't reach and make them interested in things that they may feel too intimidated by or don't feel like it has any relevance to their lives. And we find a way through storytelling to make it relevant. All right? Anybody have any questions about any of that? All right. Let's see. Just to wrap up a little bit, let's see where we are time-wise. Okay, we got a couple minutes. Let me ask you this. How many of you have ever been to an author house or museum? Tommy, where'd you go?
The Mark Twain House.
Okay,
in
Connecticut?
Hartford.
Okay, Hartford, Connecticut. What was your experience going?
It was, let's see, it was a big house. I didn't fully appreciate it at the time. I was in 8th grade.
Was it a school trip?
No, it was a trip with my parents. We
Okay.
we lived in Connecticut for a year,
Okay.
and they were like, "Let's go up to Hartford and see the Mark Twain House." And I'm like, "Cool." I didn't really feel one way or the other about it that I remember.
Okay.
I wasn't particularly interested in
Okay.
literature at the time,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, Mark Twain was not a college writer. He was a celebrity writer. People looked to him for what his political opinions were. Anything to do with Mark Twain is a great topic because it's very controversial. As long as I've been alive, the question has been, how do we talk about Adventures of Huckleberry Finn when there's 200 uses of the N-word in it? And I'll tell you, one way we don't do it is to actually use the N-word, which is an experience I had about 4 years ago with a teacher in this very department. I mean, you haven't lived until you got the call. You got this guy who's dropping N-bombs in class. And it's kind of like, I was like, dude, it's 2021. What the blankety blank are you doing? And he had this whole great theory that he was going to destigmatize that word.
You
Right.
alone.
Oh.
What a great cast.
That he was going to show that it's just a word.
The great cultural war.
And I wish I had this TikTok meme on me on hand. And I would show it to classes over in music when we have to talk about the use of the N-word in music. But have you ever seen that TikTok meme where the guy is like, he's like in a convenience store and he's like gonna fight the guy with the camera? And he's walking up to the camera and goes, "You're not that guy, pal. You're not that guy." Right? That's what I wanted to show him. We aren't gonna be that person. Now, flip side of that, for Mark Twain, is there's a publishing company up in Montgomery, New South Books, and one of their claim to fame is they published a version of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn that took the N-word out, under the idea that this would be a book this version could be taught in high schools. And you know what? They got lambasted for it. There was so much bad publicity about it. Still sold a lot of books, but they really took it on the chin in terms of people, the idea that you're doctoring great literature. So that's a great example. There's plenty of ways of making Mark Twain interesting. There's actually a couple different Mark Twain houses in the country. Anybody else? How many of you been to a museum recently? Or anything to do with the arts? Where were you?
I went to the art museum in Montgomery.
Okay.
And, I went to one in Birmingham as well.
Okay. So why'd you go there?
It was there. I like looking at the art, and I don't know much about art, like in that sense.
So let me ask you this: is your experience going to a museum like mine? You go and you kind of stand there, you kind of look around at what other people are doing. You go,
Yeah.
I like to read the descriptions of it.
Okay.
I like to know
I get
the
some
history
story
behind it.
ideas.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that we will do for one of our weekly projects is do those inscriptions for display for the writer that you choose to do. So you're going to imagine, for example, that you've got the hallway out here, and you've got one wall to tell the story. How do you tell the story? What images do you use, and what's your inscription? Part of the reason that I like doing this assignment is because a couple years ago I was drunk in Key West and just stumbled into this place called Papa's Pilar Rum, which is supposedly makes Hemingway branded rum. It's actually sort of a showcase. There's not really much produced there. It's really mass produced up in Tampa. But they have this as kind of a tourist place where you can go and you can see how rum is made. Sounds pretty good. But they put the Hemingway name on it because they're in Key West and everything there is Hemingway. And a guy that I know that wrote a book on literary cocktails. This is one of the types of books we'll talk about next week. Went through all this literature and said, well, you want to drink like Hemingway? Here's the drink from this book.
I don't think I want
Now,
to drink like him.
well, that brings
I
up
like
the
my
issue.
liver.
That brings up the issue. Are we celebrating alcoholism by
Yeah.
doing it? But, interestingly enough, sort of his argument was you can approach Hemingway as a drinker, as a connoisseur, but you can't do Fitzgerald because our sort of vision of him is much more of as a binge drinker or whatever. Now, I don't think that's true, but it justifies it. All right. So you go to the museum and you see art. What's the experience like? Did you come out invigorated?
I wasn't able to stay as long as I wanted to. I was on a time crunch, but I did, I wanted to create afterwards.
Okay.
I think for that.
That's the experience that we want to try to have for our audiences. We want to inspire them to want to be able to create and do other things. Somebody else raised their hand. Okay.
I went to an art museum in San Francisco for the Pamela conference. And I felt like the same way. I was on a time crunch because my mom didn't want to be there, so I was being rushed and everything. But I was very inspired afterwards. It was very sad.
Mhm.
The museum, there's a lot of sad stories and stuff that I read about with the inscriptions and stuff. But I did feel very inspired afterwards and wrote a couple stories after that.
Good. Yeah. Well, that's the experience that we want to try to recreate for other people and entertain them. All right. One quick thing before we go is we need to go around the room, and I got to make sure that I know everybody's name. So I'd like to start with Anais here. Just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Anais.
Give us an idea of what genre of literature that you're into.
Southern Lit.
Southern Lit. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I do medieval lit. It's really fun.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I really like Gothic.
So 19th century Gothic.
Yeah, or I don't know. I'm still looking into it. I've been doing 19th or 20th century Gothic.
You know, one of the-
crime stuff.
One of the most famous, and this is a huge tourist attraction in England, is Rebecca. Do you know that novel? It's kind of a 40s or 30s kind of Gothic. It was a huge movie.
Yeah.
But there's a whole sort of literary heritage around it. So, what are we doing? Go ahead.
I'm Tanner, and I don't have any particular focus.
Okay. So what do you read?
I'll read anything as long as the premise is interesting.
Okay, so what's an interesting premise? Just give me an idea of.
Oh my God. You're really nailing me down here. I don't know. If I read it and if I'm really bad at taking recommendations
Okay.
because I have to know a lot.
Is there a single subject that you don't like?
Don't say American Lit.
No, that I don't like.
Yeah.
No. I maybe romance stuff just because I'm so.
Because you're a dude.
No, I think I'm more pessimistic than I like.
Okay, fair enough. All right, it's good to know that you're that open. I mean, that's kind of what we want to cultivate. One thing I want to emphasize: we may get a job in an area that's not really what we're into, and it doesn't mean you have to spend your life doing it, but it's a learning opportunity.
I like that though.
Okay, yeah, good. Go ahead.
My name is Meg. I'm really into romantasy and literary fiction.
Okay, great. What do you like about romantasy?
The men are just.
There's like most of the dragons in there. And you're set.
I'm just gonna say you have made life unbearable for us, you know? We can't live up to the books anymore. That's an interesting subject because, you know, there's a lot of condescension surrounding romantasy. There's a lot of eye rolling. And it is gender-based, a lot of it. And so, and you know, I mean, I don't want to get into this issue too much, but there's also some very bizarre controversies, and I'll just use this term, there's kind of a pornification of literature involved in romantasy that is interesting to talk about. So there's a lot you can talk about with the genre. So we're not going to talk about that particular thing, just to reassure everybody. Yeah, Caitlin's disappointed. All right, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anna Brooke, but most people call me AB.
AB.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as far as like what we've studied here, I've enjoyed Dr. Robertson's like romantic and transcendentalist and all that kind of stuff. But in my free time, I do enjoy reading. I've been reading a lot about theology. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we'll tell you that when you go to Concord, Massachusetts, the Transcendentalists, that's a huge tourism area there. People love to go to the House of Seven Gables. They love to, all the Gothic stuff surrounding the witch trials and all of that is very much, I mean, that's a huge tourism area. So we may do a class on that since you're into that. Talk about and that's where the Orchard House is, the Alcott House too. So, okay, go ahead.
Hi guys, I'm Elena, and I'm into thrillers and music lit.
Okay. What do you mean by music lit?
I took a music lit class, so you know that I really love the Armageddon Rag.
Right.
I think it's Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell.
That's a great book.
Things like that. I really like music literature books. I've gotten into it since reading the first one I mentioned, like the idea of music and possession. I think that's really interesting.
Okay.
So I've been reading a lot of books like that.
Well, that's a great sort of multi-field area that you could explore. And I don't think there's been enough done on music fiction or music literature. But I will say that, when you have stuff like Daisy Jones and the Six that become kind of big and popular, there, that does generate a lot of interest in there.
Just noticed that one.
So, but thrillers also, again, talk about tourism. One of the big areas of tourism is, the murder party stuff that people have, where you take kind of plots out of Agatha Christie or whatever, you stage them over the course of a dinner party. People love that. That's a great way to get people into books again. So, okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tiana. I'd say my go-to would be fantasy, but I'm exploring Southern Gothic.
Okay. Well, we'll see if you like Tom Franklin, his fiction. Southern Gothic is great because there's a lot you can tie to with Southern history. And, that's really the original sin of America is slavery, so we're never going to quite exorcise that ghost. So. But fantasy has its place. And, people in past classes have done great stuff with J.R.R. Tolkien, because that's a huge tourism thing Go ahead.
My name's Ian. I'm also really into fantasy. And I want to brag about finishing the Wheel of Time series and starting it again recently.
Okay. Who wrote that?
Robert Jordan, yeah.
Okay. Great.
It's 13 books long.
Okay.
And they're all about like that thick.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful. I recently got the companion thing that's like a dictionary for the whole thing for Christmas.
Well, see, that's the type of reference thing that you could do as a writer at some point. You take a writer like that. Obviously, most of you know that for a period of time, Harry Potter tourism was one of the biggest. You probably know why it's not the biggest anymore.
Yeah.
Tanked her whole franchise there, even though they try to chug it on. But that's one of the great mysteries of what happened to her and why she. I mean, regardless of her beliefs, I mean, we can, you may agree with her, but the reality is that she made a decision to, that's what she became more famous for. And it's just a weird way of killing your career. So, yeah, we'll talk about the value of franchises and literary controversies like that. Go ahead.
My name is Elizabeth, and I also tend to reach for fantasy, but I really like reading anything. So.
Well, one of the things I would say about fantasy, and I have this conversation with people on the faculty, because again, it's generational. For me, when I was growing up, I was trained the idea of literature is hard-boiled stuff. It's not necessarily crime fiction, but especially for men, it was this sort of grit-lit type stuff. And I realized very quickly into my 20s that, literature can be about more than, guys drinking too much and, getting tattoos and, doing stupid stuff and women leaving them. So, but that attitude still persists out there. And I think it's one of the things that, there's this idea that fantasy is somehow a popular genre, but not a literary one. And if, Dr. Lewis would probably have a few things to say about that since he's written extensively on fantasy. So, that's kind of the flip side of what we want to argue for. Imagine that you have to face a room full of people that think fantasy is like Dungeons and Dragons nerds, right? And how do you make it interesting to a different type of audience, right? Not that Dungeons and Dragons is bad.
Thanks.
I got the starter kit.
There you go. Nice. Go ahead, Tom.
I'm Tommy. I bounce all over the place a lot. I like a lot of whenever I first started to love reading, it was because of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So I love fantasy. I really like historical fiction a lot.
Okay, good.
And I really like memoirs. Big fan of memoirs.
Memoirs are great. You mentioned historical fiction. I would say anything to do with history has a great connection to tourism. You go to Savannah, 30 years later, Savannah, major hub of Savannah tourism is at Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I mean, they're still doing tours off of that book. And that was huge business for a long time. And all it was one true crime, one of the original true crime books about a trial there. And, got people going there over and over. So lots of interesting stuff. Let me say about fantasy again that it's a generational thing. And I think probably if you are under 30 years old, fantasy is an appealing genre because you guys have lived through, the last 25 years of history has been like nonstop. I mean, it's just exhausting. I mean, we're 2 weeks into 2026 and it feels like 10 years already. So fantasy becomes a way that we can project out of the unbearable reality. It's not escapism. It's taking those issues and putting them out there in a different way. So, we want to stand up against the idea that fantasy is again, for nerds or for, kind of arrested adolescents. That's the prejudice that's out there. So how do we cut that off? All right, we have special guest.
I wouldn't say special, but yeah. I'm Caitlin Schuler. Some of you know me, some of you do not. I have so graciously been allowed to sit and listen. But I read a lot of American lit and Faulkner and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Indigenous lit. That's what I'm really interested in right now. So.
And Caitlin, you should know, was one of the first, I think the first time I taught this class this way, you were in that class. but has also worked at the Fitzgerald Museum and has some experiences there that can tell you some of the challenges of being in that type of environment that we'll talk about. All right, it's good to meet you all. I appreciate everybody in the class. We will see you Tuesday. We'll start talking about the Owl Waters and we'll talk about Franz Kafka and Prague.
Well, actually, you took notes on that one.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Go ahead.
Oh, wait,
Is
no,
that yours?
there's one with stars on it.
Oh,
I marked the dates that I didn't want to.
there we go.
If there's a test you want me to be able to pass.
Yeah, that's it.